Well, hello everyone. My name is Tim. Welcome to my humble little shop down in the basement here. It's my winter shop. I've got in the spring, summer, and fall, I usually out in the garage where I got more space to move around, but this does nicely during the winter months. So I've stumbled across this Thorens TD-160 turntable. I have a long history with Thorens turntables, going back to the years I used to live in Germany. I used to live in Lahr, which was the town where these turntables were made. I worked in audio shop. It was a Canadian military base overseas, and my father was posted there for a few years. And I worked in the PX, or the military exchange, selling hi-fi, high-end audio. We had a repair shop, so I was involved with the repair shop a little bit. And that shop was located about 3 kilometers from where the Thorens turntables were made. Now, some people will say the Thorens turntables were made in Lahr. That's actually incorrect. They were made in a little small outskirt town called Kubach, which was right near the caserne where I used to work. And ever since then, I've kind of had a love affair with these Thorens tables. The fabulous turntables for their price. So how I stumbled onto this one, I was at an audio group. There's a bunch of us like-minded audio folks that like to exchange ditties about hi-fi equipment, as well as share in some of the great music that's out there. So we do this about once a quarter, every 4 months or 3 months or so. And we've sort of reformed after COVID, and one of the friends of mine there had this turntable. He's also got the TD-150 Mark II, and he wanted to get rid of one. So I offered to either sell it for him, or I might even consider buying it myself. But so the first order of business is it's been sitting for quite a while. I'm betting the bearings, he told me he hasn't changed the oil in the bearings for ever, I guess. So what we're going to do is go through in this video. I've done a number of DIY videos on Thorens turntables, on how to tune them, how to properly balance them, set up the cartridges, change out RCA jacks when the need arises. And so what I plan on doing is doing one long video here showing what I do to one of these turntables when I receive it. Not having known the particular history of this, I'm going to check out a lot of things. One of the things I just finished checking out before I came on camera here, because there's no point in moving on unless the motor is good. And yes, indeed, the motor sounds very quiet, doesn't have any knocking. Yeah, so it's untouched. It hasn't had any thrust bearings put on it just to hide any problems or anything like that. So that's one of the first things I check out, because, like I say, if they're almost unobtainium, they're very hard to find, and almost always require a sacrificial turntable to give up its good motor for another turntable. So that's how scarce they are. So anyway, there's a lot of things I'm going to look at here. For one thing, a lot of people, what they like to do is change out the RCA jacks on these things, or the RCA cables, I should say, and jacks. I'm a big fan of the engineering that went into these turntables. And one of the things they really did right with the Thorens TD-160 X series, I call them, because you've got the TD-165, TD-166, TD-160, the Mark I, Mark II variants. You've got the 145, 147 or 6, I can't remember the ones. It's not escaping me right now. So a number of turntables back in that era that follow this kind of design in principle. The RCA cables they chose for them were well balanced for this particular turntable with the impedance loads and all of that sort of stuff. So if you've got a long RCA jack on these, or RCA set of cables, I tend to just change the RCA connectors. The reason being, these connectors are terrible. And that's probably one of the biggest problems with these when you get cutting out of one channel or not, is these oxidize fairly quickly. They're not well, they don't grip onto the RCA terminals, the female end, very well, because they, from years and years of plugging and unplugging, the contacts spread out a little bit, and you can actually tell these ones, if you look at them, they're just black with oxidation. So what I'm going to do is I'll just snip the ends of it, keep this really, really good cable that's attached to it. And then the other thing I'm not a big fan of is putting a set of RCA terminals on the back of a turntable. The reason is that's just another point of failure. The last thing you want to do in the low level signal line of a turntable, and that's right from the head shell, right from the basically the cartridge, all the way through the arm tube, down through the base, into the junction block, and out to the RCA terminals. That's all a low output signal from the actual cartridge. Last thing you want to do is have extra breaks in that, because that's where you can run into problems with hum and static noise and breaking left and right channels, or cutting in and out, that sort of thing. It's bad enough that a lot of these turntables, they have these bayonet mounts on them, because that is another junction point, and quite often a very common point of failure for the signal getting to your preamplifier. So the less number of breaks you have in that whole signal path, the better. So all we're going to do here is we're going to make sure I've got continuity all the way along to the ends of these RCA jacks from the arm tube. And if I've got that, I'm going to save these cables, use them, or I might have to do some resolder touch-ups inside. And then, of course, this portion here, just make sure all the contacts and everything are cleaned out extra well, and you've got a good connection between the head shell and the arm tube. So that's one of the things we'll be doing. The other thing, of course, is cleaning out the bearing well and re-lubing it, and using a good lube. I'm a hydrocarbon engineering technologist by education, and so I know a little bit about oils and greases and all that sort of stuff. So I just use a light machine oil. I usually use actually Singer sewing machine oil in the wells of these, and that's more than adequate for these low RPM turntables. Make sure that all of my bearings in the arm and everything are fluid. I've got a TD-160 upstairs that actually, when I bought it, somebody had dropped something on the arm tube and there was a big dent in it. So I ended up getting a new arm tube from Switzerland, and I had to take this whole assembly apart, put in the new arm tube, and redo everything. And yeah, it's my best sounding turntable. So I have no reason to believe this thing has been abused or treated improperly. In fact, I did a few little movements with it just to make sure everything's nice and smooth, and it is. The fellow that I know is the original owner, and he kept very good care of it. He didn't knock it about or anything. He just didn't know a lot about how to, maintain it and how to properly balance them and all that sort of stuff. It's a little bit of an art, I guess. So what we're going to do is go through it from both on the top side, and then we're going to have a look at the underside, make sure the springs, no doubt. It's going to be out of the suspension, probably needs a bit of tuning, although the suspension looks not too bad. This is the original plinth that goes with it. I'm not a big fan of the original plinths. They're beautiful, they're nice, and they give it that signature Thorens TD-160 look, but you can do better. So I've actually got another TD-165 out here, and the beauty is that plinth fits this turntable just as well. And it's a homemade plinth that I made out of oak, so a nice hard wood. The other thing I like to do is take the baseboard off of these. We're going to take the baseboard off, replace it by a 3/8 inch MDF that I paint up black just so it doesn't, and it sticks out the bottom a little bit. So what it does is it makes it a lot more rigid. And excuse me, I got a phone call. Well, crisis was averted, and I'm back at it. Now, I can't remember exactly where I was at because it's been a little while since we last talked. And I answered the phone. Yeah, so we were talking about the underside, I think, a little bit. About the springs, sometimes they'll sag over time, so they need to be properly adjusted. Although I did say that it seems to be pretty good. It seems to have a lot of good spring to it. But we won't know until we get everything set up correctly on the underneath. Yeah, so we'll look at the I said the arm bearings. The other thing is the cue mechanism. We'll make sure that that's operating at a proper speed for it to drop the head shell down onto the record when it's spinning. The one problem with these things over 30-40 years is the grease will dry up, and it's a really heavy, sluggish kind of grease. I usually use silicone 300K to 500K kind of grease on them. So if it is slow and it looks like it's bogging down, what we'll do is strip this assembly out. There's a cable that runs to the cue assembly underneath. There's 4 bolts. You can pop that out. A hex key to take this arm lever off, and then we'll strip the mechanism down, and then you can clean off all the old sticky lube that's slowing it down, and clean it all off with isopropyl alcohol. Then we'll put on new silicone grease, which I have back in my cupboard over there, and get it back up to speed, proper speed for lowering the arm. If it's working good, I won't touch it because it's you know, a little bit of surgery to take that apart. You always run the risk of bunging something up. So if it doesn't need it, we'll count ourselves as lucky and press on. Yeah, so there's a number of other things we'll look at. You can always do the grounding mod. I doubt we'll run it up with on a standard system and see if I have any humming or buzzing. There is a grounding mod in the TD-160 manual. In my experience, having done over a dozen of these tables, is to not do the grounding mod. I did it to one, and I've never had to actually use it. They tend to be, if you hook them up correctly and everything's tuned and properly checked out, you should not have any problem with grounding issues on these turntables. Although there is no grounding wire with them, it's grounded actually on the right channel, and that is usually sufficient. So the other thing is I have the dust cover for it. Dust cover is in really good shape. In fact, it's very rare to find these dust covers without the cracked hinges because they were basically the weak spot on the dust covers. It's got a little bit of a glazed look, but you can actually buff those up really good with a polishing kit. I use a McGuire's polishing kit that's for headlights on cars, for polishing up hazy headlights, and that stuff works the bomb for ratty dust covers, as long as there's no deep scratches, and this dust cover is in great shape. I didn't want to bring it out. I've got it tucked away in a blanket in a secure storage area. That's the last thing that I'm going to do to this turntable is break that thing out and give it a good buff up. We can do some cosmetic things to it. We can use Mother's metal polish, and you can polish the outside rim of this outer platter on this thing. Yeah, and it really pops. The only thing is it oxidizes quickly, so we'll show you how to put a coating on top of that to make it stay popped and not have it exposed to oxygen and cause it to oxidize within 6 months' time. Does not have the original platter mat. I have actually one from another turntable. I could probably use that. He opted to go with a felt. I think he lost the original platter mat, but not a big deal. I've got one kicking around, I think, somewhere. It's got the original 45 adapter. The belt on this thing absolutely needs to be changed, and that's why I'm not worried about handling it with my greasy fingers, because this thing is done. He has never, ever, ever in the whole life of this turntable changed the belt. I'm surprised it's actually in fairly good shape considering. Well, he may have changed it years and years ago, I don't know. But he said certainly not in the last 20 years. And this is not an original. It looks like an aftermarket belt. So there's only two types of belts that I use on these turntables. And that's either the Thorens brand belts, which are made to the same exacting standards as the original Thorens, bearing in mind that the new Thorens turntable, or record player or turntable company, is not the same as the one that built this. It's gone into receivership about 3 or 4 times since. Has been changed hands and changed owners. The factory is no longer in Lar. It's actually moved. It was actually in the eastern block of Europe for a while, and then bounced back to, it's now back in Germany. But while it is a great company and they make great turntables, you can't equate the two. They're not the same. So, but they still provide, they kept the specs, and they do provide a really good belt for these called and labeled Thorens because they have the rights to the name. But there's another company that does them. It's called Thacker. You can get both of them online. eBay sells them. There's a number of turntable shops and whatnot that carry them. So either a Thacker or a Thorens, they're one and the same. They equate. So either one of those, and I've got one of each right there, or 2 of each, I think, in my back drawer there. So this thing is going to go. Despite that, the motor was really, really quiet. I noticed this is an earlier, I don't know if it's an earlier, 855-852. So 085552. I believe it's an earlier run on this turntable. It's a Mark 1 because it's TP-16 arm. The other thing is, what tells me that too, is the fact it doesn't have the standoff post on the motor. And if it doesn't have a standoff post, it should, because a lot of people will be, while they're putting on their new platter, might slip and drop it. And a number of these turntables over the years have been killed. And by being killed, I mean if the motor is dead and busted and irreparable, yeah, you can maybe change out a shaft or something like that, but that's not for the sleight of heart. Then the turntable is pretty much a parts unit, because this is the Achilles heel of the turntable. Fabulous motors. They're not known to break down and everything. Its worst enemy is humankind, and doing silly mistakes and dropping things on them. And by putting a standoff post, at least gives you a little bit of a safety margin. If you did drop your inner platter outer platter, putting it on the inner platter, it's not going to bend that shaft and toast your turntable. If that thing is working good, it'll probably stay working good for another 100 years. So I wouldn't be too worried about it wearing out, because they're well-built, well-engineered motors. This one has, unlike the TD-160 it actually has a clutch assembly, which actually takes a little bit of the torque, and it takes a little bit of the wear and tear off the motor by slowly ramping up this heavy platter to speed. And that's what that clutch assembly does. So yeah, so we'll go through it, make sure the 45 is, everything's tripped, set up properly, there's no wobble. These things are they've still got the original factory red markings on the screws here. basically, to prevent them from shifting and the motor to stay vertical. But one of those will pop out, and we'll put the little post in there to protect the motor. Bearing, as I mentioned, is a bit dry. The other thing is, I'm pretty sure the previous owner, he did mount this car. It's a brand new cartridge on it. It's an Audio Technica. It's a VN45. I can't remember the model number. I think it's a VN45 or something like that. Quite a nice cartridge for and well mated to this turntable and head shell assembly and arm assembly. What we're going to do is go through this. I doubt he's used an alignment protractor. This one, actually, I've got the jig. There's a little jig that you can pop it in to make sure that your pivot distance to the stylus tip distance is ideal for this turntable. That's the quick and dirty way. The best way of doing it is with an alignment protractor, depending on what system you subscribe to. Yeah, we'll take a hard look at that. Apparently the screw mounts here, he had to kind of force a couple of screws into the M2 plate that's on the underside of these. I did a video on this head shell and how everybody seems to think that the only way you can actually use this head shell is by bolting from the underside. That's actually not true. You can watch that video. I'll put it in the comments section here when I've done this video and posted it. You can actually take this, slowly peel this plate off. It's just glued on. There's a little assembly or a little plastic plate underneath that. You can pop out, or you'll probably have to break it out and pull that plate out, and then you have 2 1/2-inch mount holes on the bottom, and you can use standard North American size head shell screws and bolts, or bolts and nuts to hold your cartridge on. And then you can put this, using double-sided tape, put this back on, and it's good as new. And it's far more adjustable that way than it is with the old factory configuration of this head shell. Yeah, and very easy to do. I've got a number of these head shells, so this one is in fairly good shape. So yeah, we're good there. So that being said, I'm going to go through all of this. It's going to be a very long video, so use the fast forward bar at the bottom of the video on YouTube as much as you need to jump forward to different sections of it. And hopefully I'll be able to tie up a lot of the videos that I did on previous DIY projects with all my other previous various Thorens turntables, and sort of wrap it all together. And this is what I would do if I got a TD-160, and how I would bring it up to the correct spec and performance that I would expect of one of these beautiful turntables. So that was a winded introduction. I will use a little bit of hyperlapse just to speed things up, so you can watch as I do things very quickly, and then I'll do a wrap-up video or section to end this video, explaining all of the things that we've done and how it all came together. So thank you for watching. All right, what I did was I just tipped it up on the other side. I put a little bit of a plug in the oil well for the bearing, so that oil doesn't seep out. Nothing came out because there's not a lot of oil in there. So it's just been probably a little bit dried out and greasy. One of the things I wanted to show you is your first inclination to clean out that oil well would be to start poking Q-tips down the inside of that bearing. I would suggest not do that, unless of course you've got lint-free ones. They're like a foam kind of Q-tip that you can buy at specialty stores, maybe a drugstore or whatever. But your normal cotton swab Q-tips, I would keep it away from your bearing well. Simple reason is if you start taking all that fluff out and it starts, you're cleaning it and using a lot of pressure, some of that can actually get into your well and adhere to the sides. And then of course that becomes a friction pad. So I tend not to put anything that's able to produce heavy duty lint into the bearing well. Yes, you could even clean that out, but it's really hard to see inside to see if maybe you've left something behind there. So stay away from Q-tips unless they're lint-free ones, like foam swabs or whatever. What you want to do is use some sort of a lint-free cloth, maybe an HB pencil or something, very, very carefully. You don't want to damage any of the bearing walls or whatever, the bearing receiver walls, and clean it out that way. So I'm going to do that last, but just because that'll be sort of the finishing touch stuff before I put the inner platter back in. And once you've got it properly lubricated, this one it just sort of sank down really quick, so it indicates to me that there's not a sort of an airtight, clean sort of lubricated bearing there. So when it's properly lubricated, you can actually pop these things in, and it takes a while for the air to bypass the bearing shaft and get it down to the bottom of the well. So in taking the baseboard off, these are basically what they put on these old turntables. Yeah, they make it a little more rigid, but you can see it's quite flexible. It's not that sturdy. That's why I tend to go to a 3/8 inch MDF, a really dense baseboard. And what I'll use this as is a template, and I'll use my table saw, cut it out, and then drill out the holes. What I noticed is these holes actually should be little blocks on the side here for transport screws, transport locks. So you on these old turntables, you used to be able to lock down the suspension mechanism so it doesn't knock about while it's being shipped in its shipping box. So either this was an afterthought Plinth, or maybe the earlier ones they didn't actually put those suspension locks in. I know my TD-165s, they have the same holes, and then they have those suspension locks in there. So I'm thinking, this particular earlier versions didn't have those suspension locks. So the other thing I noticed is, in comparing it against my 160 that I have upstairs, which makes me think this is an earlier turntable, is the fact that the Tonearm wiring block that goes to the RCA jacks here looks much like my TD-165, which were early model, also Thorens turntables. So the block assembly is slightly different than mine, and of course you got the tape here for the arm wires. And what I noticed right away as soon as I took it off is two of the actual suspension springs are really clean and really pretty good shape. There's a lot of spider webs inside that I've cleaned out. They're not a lot, but I mean there is some spider webs in here. So we'll give that a good clean out, make sure nothing's left behind from any critters or anything that might have snuck in through the side. But I noticed this spring here is all rusted. So somebody at one point may have spilled a drink or something on it, because this particular suspension spring is just full of rust. Easy to come off, easy to clean. We'll just we'll use talcum powder, and I will show you how to. I've actually got another video that shows how to do that, but I'll do it again this time around. The one thing I won't do is show you how I make that MDF plinth. For the simple reason I made a separate video just on doing that, and also changing out the RCA. In this case, because somebody had cut it right down, I changed out the whole cable because it was not salvageable. This one is salvageable, and it's in really good shape. So we'll show you how to do that. But I'll put that video link in the comments of this video as well, on how to make a MDF replacement baseboard, which will firm up the the plinth if you decide to go with the same plinth. I'm going to pause right here, and then I'm going to go into the other room and I'll show you one of the plinths that I made for a TD-165 and another 165 that I dressed up. And what I'll do is I'm considering actually putting that plinth on this one and then this one back onto the 165, but we'll see. Let's take a time out here for a second. Right, so this is a plinth I made myself actually. It's made out of oak, solid oak plank that I stripped down using my table saw, and then I used some corner clamps to actually glue together each of the corners on this, and then I've got corner braces inside, and basically cored out the holes in the same pattern as the TD-165. Now this TD-165 was a rescue unit. It was badly scarred and beat up on the top plate. So what I ended up, it's a bit dusty right now. I should have cleaned it before I took this video, but oh well, you get the picture. So I put a faux carbon fiber sort of top plate onto it, or skin on top of the old top plate, which I stripped down, and it really looks nice when it's dusted. So it's really essentially the same turntable as over there, although it has the a plastic inner platter instead of the metal inner platter. It's got the plastic 45 adapter instead of the metal one, but it's the same outer platter, same rubber platter mat, although that one was missing, so I may rob this one as well. And then the TP11 arm instead of a TP16. But other than that, pretty much the same turntable. Audibly, they're the same. There's no difference. So this one I put on some really nice feet. They're actually conical feet, and these are just sort of wells that they sit in so they don't scratch your furniture. And then I 3D printed the Thorens on the front. So I'm probably going to use this plinth for that other turntable because it's a much stiffer, heavy-duty oak. So it's a hardwood, and you can see the bottom here. You can see how the MDF plat or the baseboard sort of sticks down. I'm going to be making another one for that one anyway, but it'll fit either this plinth or the original plinth. So I make those up to replace the crappy baseboards on them. This is the other turntable I did. It's actually the exact same turntable as that one, only this one is dressed up as a theme to match my quad 44 and quad 303 amp that I rebuilt. I had to, they were rescue units found in a barn. They were all scarred up and the paint was all shot and everything, so I tricked them out to be British, basically Austin powered themed components, and they sound just fabulous. So same idea, same arm, just dressed up differently, that's all. And that's going to be one of the options I'm going to consider. I can either go original, which some people like, makes it more saleable, I guess, but going with a custom plinth is going to make it sound a lot better, because it'll be more rigid and it will isolate basically better than the original plinth. We'll go upstairs and show you my other turntable as well. And here's my other Thorens TD-160 that I was talking about. Same idea. This one I had a neighbor actually built the plinth here for me. It was kind of a swap of skill sets. I rebuilt a computer for him, and he built this as a thank you to house my TD-160. This is the one where I replaced the arm tube, which had a big dent in it. I've got that out in the garage, and now it's just perfect. So there you have it. So the other thing that I'm going to do, of course, while I stripped this down, I didn't want to have the arm being bunged up by having the weights and everything off, so I've taken all the weights off of it. The other thing I did was remove these. These are the feet for the base plate. And actually, that's the side that goes down, These notches are for the RCA jacks and the power cord, and these are the feet, and they are probably the stingiest feet I've ever seen on a turntable in my entire life. And there's no way in hell these are going to go back on any turntable that's coming out through my front door because they're crap. Anyway, so what we're going to do, I like to go the conical feet mode. We can go with big blocks, block feet or whatever. There's all kinds of different options for feet, but you can certainly do better than a little flathead screw inside a little piece of rubber, because these are, like I say, I think they're crap. So, I've got a whole drawer full of them outside in case if anybody needs one and you're trying to replace some cracked ones. I've probably got 8 or 10 or 12 or something like that out in my garage and in a drawer somewhere. So anyway, we'll trick that out. You can see the tape here. Well, it just, that's the glue. I thought it was oil, but it's actually, if you look at the color of that, it looks like it was all covered in oil, but really it's just the adhesive that's dried up on this. Looks like it's an old Scotch tape or something from Germany or whatever. But anyway, as tape, it's useless because it's so dried out. So that's garbage. And then the other thing is, you want to have a nice tape or something. You want to make sure that you're not impinging the motion of your arm. So you have to have a little bit of, you don't want to have it totally under strain or anything. You want to have it, easily movable, but you also want to make sure this is not flopping around inside. So usually just a little bit of tape there, something that's not going to dry out after 20 years. We'll put something there. And this is that queuing mechanism I was talking about. The spring you have to remove. You have to remove this, unbolt it, and if it needs to be re-lubricated, we'll strip that whole assembly apart. Hopefully I don't have to do that, because usually over the test of time these things actually have stood up quite well. But I've run into a couple that I've had to rebuild, so I'm getting pretty good at it now. So there you go. We'll do that. And not much else to monkey with. I don't want to monkey with, because everything's nice and vertical on the arm. There's no wobble or anything on the motor. So I shouldn't have to be able to touch that. And we'll take it from there. So back to hyperlapse. So I've had another thought. Rather than waiting till the very end of all of this, I'm going to start an audio karma post or on this Thorens turntable, and I want this to be interactive, I guess. So what I'm going to do, instead of just waiting till the very end and then posting it on YouTube and then sending links to all the various groups on Facebook or whatever, I'm going to start the Facebook or the Audio Karma thread on this turntable build, and then I'll post the videos as I take them, so you'll probably get, I may stitch all these ones I've just done together as one, and then I'll do incremental videos as I go along, and then at the very end I'll stitch everything together and make one big long video as a sort of a reference video for anybody that outside of Audio Karma might want to have a poke through. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go back and do some editing here, throw this video together, start the Audio Karma thread, and then we'll pick it up from here and move through the whole process of cleaning this bad boy up and making it worthy of selling or keeping.